Okay, picture this. You wake up one morning in 1896 on the western frontier. Just a normal day. You're making breakfast, completely unaware that in just a few months, you'll be living through the deadliest winter anyone has ever seen. A cold so intense it could freeze you solid before you even knew what was happening. Cattle would freeze standing up, like statues in the snow. If you're enjoying these stories, hit that like button or subscribe. I'm always curious to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment with your city and what time it is there. It still amazes me that people are drifting off to this all over the world. Alright, get cozy. Take a slow, deep breath and let yourself sink into your chair or bed. We're going back to 1886. Trust me, you'll be incredibly thankful for that warm, soft bed and the solid roof over your head. So congratulations. You've just woken up in the winter of 1896 on the western frontier. Your eyes open slowly to a dim, gray world. The air inside your tiny cabin is sharp in your lungs. Each breath stings your nose. This isn't cold. This is cold with teeth. Your bed is no modern miracle. It's a simple wooden frame against the wall. The mattress is stuffed with straw. It crinkles every time you move. Piled on top are heavy blankets, layers of wool and whatever animal hides you managed to prepare before the weather turned. You don't jump up. No, the morning starts with lying there. You're gathering the courage to leave what little warmth your bed holds. The fire died hours ago. The temperature inside isn't much better than outside. The windows, if you're lucky enough to have glass and not just oiled paper, are completely frosted over. Delicate ice patterns formed overnight. Nature's artwork. It would be beautiful if it was a constant reminder of the killing cold. In the gloom, you see your breath cloud in front of your face. You reach one hand out from under the covers. Instant regret. The air feels like it could crack. This cold doesn't just chill you, it bites. Your exposed skin stings, then goes numb frighteningly fast. Finally, you throw the covers back. You quickly pull on the clothes you kept in bed with you overnight. You learn that trick fast. Keeping tomorrow's clothes at the foot of the bed means they're not ice minus cold when you dress. Base simple hack. The pioneers figured out hundreds of them. Your feet hit the plank floor. You wince, even through wool socks. The cold shoots up your legs. You need to get that fire going. Now starting a morning fire was a race against frostbite. People didn't delay. This was about survival, not comfort. You hurry to the small iron stove in the corner. Last night's ashes are cold, but you planned for this. Beside the stove is a pile of kindling thin wood strips, maybe some dry grass or paper. Most important, you kept matches close by, maybe even in your pocket while you slept, to keep them dry. Your fingers are already stiff. You arrange the kindling, add a few sticks, strike a match. The tiny flame seems terribly fragile against the vast cold. You cup your hands around it. You protect it like the precious thing it is. Winters in the Wild West taught you what mattered fast. And fire. Fire was one. The kindling catches. The first wave of relief hits you. You add small splits of wood, then a log. The cast-iron stove begins to warm. First the metal, then the air around it. It will be a long time before the cabin feels comfortable. But now there's hope. Here's where it gets interesting. You're probably thinking of launch, right? Sure, if you live near trees. But across the Great Plains, trees were scarce. So what did people burn instead? Buffalo chips. Yes, exactly what it sounds like. Dried buffalo dung. When the buffalo were gone, cow chips took their place. It sounds gross to us, but it was brilliant. Once dried, these chips burned hot and steady. Almost no smell. They were everywhere on the plains. Free for the taking. Easy to store. A literal lifesaver when the nearest tree was miles away. You open the stove door. Carefully, you add a few chips to the fire. They catch quickly. Soon, the stove is properly hot. You hold your hands close, letting the warmth seep back into your stiff fingers. The relief is incredible. It's like coming inside on a freezing day and wrapping your hands around a hot drink. That simple, profound pleasure of warmth returning to frozen limbs. Outside, the world is still dark. The sun won't rise for another hour. Winter days are short here. You have precious little daylight to get everything done. And there is always so much to do, just to stay alive. Your cabin isn't big. Most wear it. Maybe 14 by 16 feet. About the size of a modern bedroom. One room for everything. Cook, eat, sleep. On days when the weather is too brutal, you work on indoor chores here. The walls are made of logs if you're in a wooded area. Gaps stuffed with mud, moss, clay, anything to keep the wind out. Or maybe you live in a sod house. A sod die. On the treeless plains, many settlers built homes from blocks of prairie sod. Thick walls of dirt and grass roots, stacked like bricks. These houses were great insulators. Cooler in summer, warmer in winter than a drafty cabin. But they had problems. Dirt constantly sifted down from the ceiling. Bugs and snakes lived in the walls. A heavy rain could start dissolving your house. You move around the cabin. There's a small table, a bench, maybe a trunk for extra clothes. The windows are tiny. Glass was expensive and hard to get. Every window was a place for heat to escape. Some cabins had no windows at all. Just a door and a hole in the roof for smoke. Speaking of smoke, as your fire grows, a thin haze fills the cabin. No chimney is perfect, especially not in a pioneer cabin. You're used to it. A little smoke is a fair trade for not freezing. The stove is now hot enough to cook. You set a cast-iron pot on top. Inside is water from a stream or melted snow and some dried beans, soaking since last night. You add a small piece of salt pork if you're lucky. That's breakfast started. It will take time. That's fine. You have chores. You put on more layers before heading outside. Staying warm washed about one big coat. It was about smart layering. You start with long underwear. They called them long johns. Wool or flannel. They covered you from ankle to wrist, trapping warm air against your skin. Next, a heavy shirt. Again, wool or flannel. Wool was the miracle fabric. It kept you warm even when wet. Crucial when sweat or snow soaked through. Cotton, on the other hand, was deadly in winter. Once wet, it lost all insulation and pulled heat from your body. Cotton kills, the saying went. Over the shirt, a wool vest for your core. Then a thick wool coat. On your legs, heavy wool trousers. Often with leather chaps over them if you were riding. Your feet, several pairs of wool socks. Sturdy leather boots, waterproof with beeswax or fat. On your hands, mittens worked better than gloves. Fingers together shared warmth. Finally a hat. Huge amounts of body heat escaped from your head. Settlers never went bareheaded in winter. A wool hat pulled over your ears was standard. For those who could afford it, fur was even better. Beaver, rabbit, buffalo. These natural insulators kept animals alive. They could do the same for you. A firm, inus-lined coat could mean the difference between life and death in a blizzard. Speaking of blizzards, that's what worries you today. The sky has that heavy, strange look old minus-timers learned to recognize. A storm is coming. You step outside. The cold hits you like a wall. It's not just the temperature, maybe 20 below zero. It's the wind. On the plains, nothing breaks it. No hills, no trees. Just flat land for miles. The wind gains speed, cutting through your layers like then nothing. Your first job is caring for your livestock. Maybe a cow for milk, some chickens, hopefully a horse. These animals aren't just equipment. They're your partners in survival. You depend on each other. Their small barn or lean minus isn't much warmer, but it blocks the wind. The animals huddled together overnight, sharing body heat. Their breath rises in clouds. The smell of hay and manure is almost pleasant compared to the sterile winter air. You break the ice on their water trough. It might be inches thick. You refill it with water from the well or stream. Then you give them hay or feed. If you're running low, you might have to give them less. It's a hard choice. Keep them healthy but make supplies last until spring. As you work, your fingers and toes ache with cold. This isn't discomfort. It's an early warning of frostbite. You know not to ignore it. People who didn't respect the cold lost fingers, toes, ears. You've seen it happen. The blackened flesh that never heals. So you head back inside to the blessed warmth of your stove. Your breakfast has been simmering. The rich smell of beans and pork fills the cabin. You eat quickly standing by the stove. The hot food warms you from the inside. It gives you energy for the hours ahead. Outside, the wind picks up. It drops tiny bits of snow and ice that sting your skin. You need to prepare for what's coming. Winter storms here weren't just inconvenient. They were lethal. The blizzard of January 1887 was one of the worst. 16 inches of snow fell in as many hours. Temperatures dropped to 46 below zero in places. The wind whipped snow into drifts that could bury a house. People got lost trying to walk from their house to their barn, just a few yards from safety. In the blinding white with no landmarks, they walked in circles until the cold took them. Bodies were found in spring, sometimes just feet from their own doors. So you take no chances. You string a rope from your cabin door to the barn, a lifeline for when you can't see. You bring an extra firewood or buffalo chips, piling them by the stove. You check your food. How long could you last if snowed in for days or weeks? Then you wait. A strange, heavy silence comes before a big snow, like the world is holding its breath. The birds are quiet, gone south or hunkered down. Even the wind seems to pause. Then it begins. First a few lazy flakes. Soon, snow falls fast and thick, driven sideways by the wind. It howls around the corners of your cabin, finding every crack. Little drifts form on the inside windowsill. You add more fuel to the fire, building it higher than usual. Heat is life now. The temperature outside is dropping fast. By nightfall, it might be 30 or 40 below, cold enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes. Inside, you light a candle or a lamp. The flickering light creates a small circle of warmth. It feels precious against the howling dark outside. You make a simple dinner. More beans. Maybe some cornbread if you have it. Then you prepare for a long night. Sleep won't come easy with the wind screaming. It sounds alive, angry, looking for a way in. You pile every blanket you own onto your bed. Maybe you eat rocks in the fire, wrap them in cloth, and tuck them under the covers. An old trick, but it works. As you lie there, listening to the storm, you realize something important. Out here, nobody survives alone. The people who make it are the ones who look out for each other. You think about your nearest neighbors. My lord, to a ways. Are they prepared? Do they have enough wood? Enough food? When the storm breaks, you'll check on them. That's just what people did. Communities came together. They shared resources, knowledge, labor. Barn raisings, harvests, building houses, these were community events. The same spirit got people through winters. If someone ran out of food, others shared. Not just from charity, but because next time, it might be them who needed help. That was the real secret to surviving the brutal cold. Not just innovation or toughness. The warmth of human connection. People endured incredible hardship, but they rarely did it alone. You settled deeper into your bed, finding the warm spot. Your muscles relaxed despite the storm outside. The contrast makes your comfort sweeter. The deadly cold is just inches away, beyond your walls. But you're wrapped in warmth you created yourself. Your breathing slows. You picture those early settlers, bundled in wool and fur, gathered around iron stoves while blizzards raged. There's deep comfort in human resilience. Their ability to create safety in the harshest places. You shift, getting comfortable. The wind sings its ancient song outside your window. You're grateful for the sturdy walls between you and the elements. Morning comes slowly after a night of bitter cold. The blizzard has settled into a steady snowfall. Less violent now, but no less dangerous. Inside your cabin, the fire burned low again. That first moment of leaving your warm blankets is still a shock. But now, you're quicker. Your fingers remember the dance of survival. You rebuild the fire fast. The inside walls of your cabin are lined with frost where your breath froze overnight. It sparkles in the faint light. Beautiful in a way. But that kind of beauty comes with teeth. As the fire catches, you look outside. The world is transformed. Where there was a yard, a path, familiar landmarks, now there is only white. Snow has drifted against the cabin halfway up the walls in places. Your world has shrunk to this small space. An island of warmth in an ocean of white cold. The winter of 1887 wasn't just another hard season. It rewrote history. They would call it the Great Die Minus Up. A grim play on words. Instead of a cattle round minus up, it was a die minus up. That winter killed cattle by the hundreds of thousands across the plains. The summer before had been unusually hot and dry. Prairie fires swept the grasslands. They left little for animals to eat. Water sources dried up. By fall, the land was already stressed. The animals, both wild and tame, were weak when winter came. Nature gave warnings for those who knew how to read them. Birds flew south earlier than usual. Beavers gathered more wood for their winter stores. Some cattle grew thicker coats. But many new settlers, especially the big ranchers from the East or Europe, didn't see the signs. They hadn't learned the language of the land yet. When November brought the first snows earlier and heavier than anyone expected, those who had prepared began to worry. Those who hadn't began to suffer. You stir your morning porridge, oats or cornmeal if you're lucky. Maybe just flour and water if supplies are low. You think about food. In winter, food isn't just about stopping hunger. It's fuel for your body's internal fire. It's survival. Settlers and Native Americans both knew winter needed different eating. Diets shifted to more fats and proteins, nutrients that helped make body heat and lasting energy. Pemmican was one of the most important survival foods. Created by indigenous peoples, adopted by fur raiders and settlers. A mix of dried meat pounded to powder, melted fat, sometimes dried berries, dense, long-lasting nutrition. It could keep a person alive through the worst conditions. Your own winter stores might have preserved meat, salt pork, smoked venison, dried beef, root vegetables, potatoes, turnips, carrots, stored in a root cellar, or buried in straw under your bed where they wouldn't freeze. Dried beans, corn, flour were staples. Dried fruits gave rare sweetness and needed nutrients. Every frontier family became an expert in food preservation, not as a hobby, but as a necessity. Smoking, salting, drying. These skills kept starvation away when fresh food was impossible. The fire is blazing now, warming the small space. You add a precious chunk of coffee to a pot of water, if you have any. The bitter drink was worth its weight in gold, not just for warmth, but for the energy burst. If coffee is too scarce, you might make tea from pine needles. Not tasty, but rich in vitamin C. It helped prevent scurvy when fresh fruits and vegetables were gone. Outside, the livestock need tending, despite the weather. He bundled up layer by layer, making a cocoon of warmth before facing the cold. The clothing that protected people wasn't just functional. It was ingenious. Let's look at it piece by piece from the skin out. Next to your skin, long underwear. Long johns. Not like thin modern thermals. Thick, often wool or flannel, covering ankle to wrist. Sometimes a 1-piece union suit with a button flap and back. It created the first essential layer of insulation. The fabric matted. Cotton was dangerous in winter. Once wet from sweat or snow, it lost insulation and pulled heat from your body, or kept most of its insulating power even when wet. It also wicks moisture away, keeping you drier and warmer. Over the long johns, a shirt. Again, flannel or wool. Women might wear a heavy dress with many petticoats for extra layers. Men often added a wool vest, another layer of warmth for the core. Then, a heavy coat or jacket. Wool was common, but fur was better if you could get it. Buffalo coats were prized for incredible warmth. Bear, beaver, rabbit all made excellent winter wear. A good fur coat could last decades if cared for. On your legs, heavy wool trousers. Sometimes an extra layer underneath in deepest cold. Cowboys added leather chaps. Not the decorative rodeo kind, but practical coverings against wind, brush, and cold. The warmest were woolies made from Angora goat hides with the fur on. These shaggy chaps helped a rider sit for hours in freezing weather. Your feet get special attention. Frostbite attacked extremities first. Multiple pairs of wool socks. Then sturdy leather boots, waterproof with beeswax or animal fat. Some used foot wraps. Cloth strips wrapped around the feet for extra insulation. Hands were protected by mittens when possible. Keeping fingers together let them share warmth. The best mittens had fur outside, wool inside, with long cuffs to keep snow out. Finally the hat. Huge amounts of body heat escaped through your head. No one went bareheaded. For hats with ear flaps were ideal. Some added a wool scarf wrapped around the face and neck, a kind of early balaclava. Fully dressed, a frontier settler looked like a walking bundle of furs and wool. Not pretty or convenient. Layers made movement awkward. Find asks were hard with mitten and hands, but it kept you alive. You finish dressing. You brace for the blast of cold as you open the door. Even expecting it, the intensity shocks you. The air feels solid. You push through it. Your breath freezes instantly. Tiny ice crystals form in your beard or on your scarf. The snow is deep, maybe 2 feet or more, with drifts much higher. Walking to the barn is exhausting work. Each step needs a high lift to clear the snow. After a few yards, you're breathing hard, sweating under all those layers. And that's dangerous. Sweat can freeze against your skin once you stop, pulling heat fast. You strung a guide rope from cabin to barn for this exact reason. When you can't see, when getting lost means death, you keep one gloved hand on the rope and push forward. The animals greet you with steaming breath. They're hungry, thirsty, confined. Your first job is breaking the ice on their water trough. It might be inches thick. Then you give out hay or feed, measuring carefully. Feed must last until spring. And in a winter like Texas -87, spring felt a long way off. For the big cattle ranchers of the plains, this winter was a catastrophe. Before 18 Texas, the cattle industry worked on the open range. Huge herds roamed free across unfenced grasslands, eating native grasses. Ranchers turned cattle loose, rounded them up in spring for branding, gathered some for market in fall. This system worked when winter's worm-idled and grass was plenty. It created perfect conditions for disaster when weather turned brutal. Free-ranging cattle had no shelter from blizzards. No extra feed when snow buried the grass. Nowhere to go when temperatures crashed. The winter of 1887 changed drenching forever. Cattle died by the thousands. Frozen standing up, stacked against fence lines where they tried to escape the wind, or simply starved, unable to reach food under deep snow. By spring, carcasses littered the plains. The smell, as they thawed, was unimaginable. Rivers clogged with dead animals, washed downstream by melting snow. Ranchers worth fortunes in fall found themselves bankrupt by spring. Theodore Roosevelt, who owned a Dakota ranch, lost over half his herd. He called his losses crippling. The era of the open range was over. After this, ranchers who stayed in business kept smaller herds. They grew hay for winter feed. They built fenced pastures and shelters. The romantic image of vast, free-roaming herds was replaced by the practical reality of managed grazing and winter preparation. You finish with the animals. You follow the guide rope back to the cabin. The work warmed you, but also tired you. Winter is exhausting. Every task takes more energy, more planning, more care. Back inside, you take off your outer layers. You hang them near but not too near the stove to dry. Any moisture from snow or sweat must gone. Damp clothing in winter wasn't just uncomfortable. It could be deadly, pulling precious heat from your body. The middle of a winter day passes in a cycle of necessary tasks. Keep the fire going. Melt snow for water if the well is frozen. Do indoor repairs. Mend harnesses, make candles, knit socks, prepare food. Check on animals. Always watch the sky, the wind, the subtle signs that tell you what the weather will do next. Winter changed daily routines. People scheduled outdoor chores for the warmest part of the day, usually between Tina, M and P. And heavy labor was minimized to save energy when food was limited. Travel stopped except for emergencies. But winter also created a different kind of community. Isolated in cabins, settlers couldn't gather often, but they became more interdependent. If someone ran low on food or fuel, neighbors shared. After storms, people checked on each other, sometimes digging through snowdrifts to reach buried cabins. For many Native American tribes, winter was traditionally a time of community gathering, storytelling, passing down knowledge. Extended families camped together, sharing resources and protection. The winter count, a pictorial history on buffalo hide, would come out. New events were added, connecting each generation to the past. Winter required mental adaptation too. Short days, long nights, isolation could lead to cabin fever, restlessness, irritability, sometimes worse. Those who thrived found ways to keep their minds busy. Reading, crafts, music, games, storytelling. The afternoon brings a subtle change. The snowfall tapers off. Sometimes the cloud cover thins, letting watery sunlight through. Not a break in the storm, but a brief respite. You use the slightly better conditions to check things. The cabin roof under snow weight. Drifts blocking paths. Your wood pile. The outside world is transformed and strangely beautiful. Snow has rounded every sharp edge, buried every familiar thing. It sparkles in filtered sun like tiny diamonds. The air, when the wind isn't blowing, has a clarity and stillness that feels almost supernatural. A deep silence, broken only by the creak of snow-laden branches or a distant winter bird. It's beautiful, yes, but that beauty could kill if it made you careless. Many settlers described winter's hypnotic effect, the peace and beauty that made you want to rest in the snow for just a moment, but getting in often meant never getting up again. The cold would dull your senses, slow your heart and breathing, until you drifted from sleep to death. So you admire the view quickly, then return to the cabin's safety. Inside, you would fuel to the fire and think about dinner. Winter meals were often stews or soups that could simmer all day, making the most of limited ingredients, providing hot, filling food. Maybe a bean soup with a bit of salt pork for flavor, or a stew of preserved meat and root vegetables. Bread or biscuits baked near the fire. If you had lard or tallow rendered animal fat, you'd spread it on the bread. Calorie-minus dense fuel for your body's furnace. The short winter day is already fading toward dusk. You light a candle or oil lamp. Its small flame makes a circle of golden light. It feels precious against the gathering dark. Artificial light was scarce and valuable. Candles were often homemade from tallow animal fat or beeswax. Lamp oil might be whale oil, kerosene, or rendered fat. These lights were used sparingly, only for tasks you couldn't do by firelight. As evening deepens, you bank the fire in your stove. You arrange coals and half-burned wood, cover them with ashes so they'll smolder slowly all night. A skill that took practice. It meant the difference between waking to a cool cabin and a freezing one with a dead fire. You prepare for bed with the same care for warmth. Maybe you heat trucks in the fire, wrap them in cloth, put them under the blankets. Some settlers used jugs of hot water. The bed had many blankets layered, soft ones against skin, heavier, rough ones on top. As you settle in, your thoughts might turn to spring. It seems impossibly distant in this frozen world. But you know it will come. The snow will melt. Grass will green. Life will return. That hope, that certainty of change, helped generations of settlers endure winters that tested human limits. They survived not just through physical preparation, but through the mental strength to see beyond hardship to the renewal that would follow. You pull blankets to your chin, feeling their pleasant weight. The cabin is quiet except for the occasional pop from the stove. Outside, the wind has picked up again, but its howl seems distant now. You're wrapped in layers of warmth. Your body feels heavy with the honest tiredness of a survival day. Each muscle relaxes as you breathe slowly, deeply. There's deep satisfaction in meeting winter's challenges. Keeping the fire burning, the animals fed, your small space of safety intact against the vast cold outside. Your breathing slows. You look at the faint orange glow of banked coals through the stove door cracks. That small light is a beacon, a sign of human ingenuity and perseverance. The ability to create warmth and safety even in the most hostile places. You shift, finding that perfect, comfortable position. Your shoulders drop, your jaw relaxes. The quiet darkness of a frontier night settles around you like a familiar friend. The blizzard settles into a rhythm over the following days, sometimes raging with fresh fury, sometimes easing just enough to allow a brief venture outside. Inside your cabin, you find a rhythm too. The harsh realities of winter impose a strange kind of simplicity. Life narrows to its essentials: warmth, food, water, safety. Morning comes with the now minus familiar routine. The shock of cold air as you leave your blankets. The careful rebuilding of the fire. The layers of clothing. The trek to care for the animals. The constant, never mind ascending watch against the cold that waits just outside your walls, patient and hungry. But today, something is different. When you step outside, you notice the wind has died down completely. The air is still brutally cold, your breath freezes instantly, but the absence of wind makes it feel almost peaceful. The snow-minus covered land stretches away in gentle swells, blindingly white under a sky that has finally cleared to a pale, distant blue. In this mode of calm, you decide to check on your nearest neighbors. In the isolated homesteads of the frontier, neighbors might be miles apart, but the bonds between them were often stronger than in crowded towns. Winter survival depended on community as much as individual preparation. You harness your horse to a sled or wagon if you have one. If not, you might set out on horseback or even on foot, though distances that seemed short in summer became dangerous journeys in winter. Either way, you dress in your warmest layers. You pack some food and a blanket. Getting stranded between homes could be fatal. Breaking trail through deep snow is exhausting work. Even with a horse, the animal struggles forward, snow sometimes reaching its chest. The sled behind cuts a path that might be used for days or weeks to come. You keep your eyes fixed on landmarks: a distinctive tree, a rise in the land, maybe smoke from a distant chimney. Getting lost in this white vastness would mean death. Navigating in winter was a serious skill. Without maps, GPS, or phones, travelers relied on intimate knowledge of the land and careful observation. Native Americans and experienced settlers could read signs invisible to the untrained: the way certain trees leaned, patterns of stars, the behavior of wildlife. They passed this knowledge down through generations, creating mental maps more detailed than anything on paper. For newer settlers, winter travel was riskier. Many tied bells to their horses. If they got lost in a sudden snowstorm, the sound might guide them back. Others strung guide ropes between buildings on their own property. Stories were common of people found frozen just yards from their doors, disoriented in white-out conditions. After what feels like hours of careful progress, you spot your neighbor's cabin. A small, dark shape against the overwhelming white. Smoke rises from the chimney in a straight column, a good sign. Someone is alive and well inside. Your arrival is met with genuine joy. Winter visitors were rare. They broke the isolation that could stretch for weeks. You brought inside to thaw by the fire. You're offered whatever food and drink is available. Hospitality was never refused. In this harsh place, turning someone away could mean their death. The conversation turns, as it always did in winter, to survival. How are the food stores holding? Is there enough feed for the livestock? Has anyone been sick? What news, if any, has come from more distant settlements? This exchange wasn't just social. It was a vital network of mutual support. If one family was running low on something, others would share what they could. If someone hadn't been seen for too long, a group might organize to check on them. Knowledge about weather, wild food, medical treatments, ways to insulate or heat all was shared freely. It helped everyone. In severe winters like 1887, these community bonds were tested. As supplies dwindled and conditions worsened, sharing could mean dividing scarcity, not abundance. Yet accounts from that time describe extraordinary acts of generosity. People going hungry to feed a neighbor's child, traveling through danger to bring medicine to the sick, sharing the last of their firewood or food. After sharing news and a simple meal, you prepare to head back before daylight fades. Winter days are short, maybe only 8 or 9 hours of true light on the northern plains. Being caught out after dark multiplied the dangers. Your neighbors might send you home with something. Eggs if their chickens are still laying. A loaf of bread. Some preserved fruit. Not because they have plenty, but because that's how communities worked. The gifts would be repaid when possible, creating a web of mutual obligation that helped everyone survive. The journey back follows the trail you broke earlier. It's less physically demanding but still needs constant watchfulness. The temperature drops fast as the sun sinks. Cold that was merely painful during the day becomes dangerous. You keep your eyes on your own cabin, watching the thin wisp of smoke from your banked morning fire. It seems impossibly distant, though it can't be more than a mile or two. Distance itself feels different in winter, stretched and distorted by the effort to cross it and the cost of getting it wrong. The sky changes color as you finally reach home. Pale blue deepens to indigo. The western horizon shows brief, spectacular streaks of orange and pink. Winter sunsets on the plains could take your breath away. The pure, cold air created colors more vivid than summer's hazy warmth. But you don't linger to admire it. Beauty is secondary to warmth and safety. Inside, the fire has burned low but not out. You feed it carefully, coaxing embers back to flame with kindling, then larger wood or buffalo chips. The simple act of building a fire, something humans have done for tens of thousands of years, takes on almost sacred meaning in winter. It's not just comfort. It's life itself. As feeling returns to your cold numb fingers and toes, a painful process of prickling and burning that old timers called the screaming me, might you think about the different ways people survive frontier winters. Native American tribes had centuries of accumulated knowledge, adapted to their specific environments. Plains tribes like the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Blackfeet used tip is that were remarkably well suited to harsh winters. Made of buffalo hide, not solid walls, a properly built teepee was surprisingly warm. Its cone-shaped central fire created excellent airflow, drawing smoke up and out while keeping heat in. An inner lining created an insulating airspace, stopping drafts. In the coldest weather, the bottom edge would be banked with snow for extra insulation. Teepees could also be taken down and moved quickly if game or weather demanded a change. Plains tribes adapted their whole way of life to the seasons. Many followed buffalo herds in summer and fall, then wintered in sheltered river valleys where wood was available and wind was blocked. Their winter camps were community affairs, extended families and groups camping together for support and protection. For European settlers, winter survival strategies depended partly on where they came from. Scandinavian immigrants, already familiar with harsh winters, brought techniques like double-wall construction to wooden walls separated by insulating material. German settlers introduced efficient cast-iron stoves that radiated heat better than open fireplaces. Those from milder climates had a steeper learning curve. There are sad accounts of families from England, Italy, or the American South who weren't prepared for plains winter. Some died. Others survived only because more experienced neighbors taught them essential skills. One of the most remarkable winter dwellings was the dugout. Literally a home dug into the side of a hill or into the ground itself, with an earthen roof supported by salvaged timber. These homes looked primitive but were excellent at keeping a steady temperature. The thick earth walls held heat in winter and stayed cool in summer. Many families lived in dugouts while gathering materials for a proper house, but some chose to stay in them for years because they worked so well. Sod houses built from blocks of prairie turf cut and stacked like bricks offered similar benefits. Thick walls of dirt and grass roots provided great insulation. They were cool in summer and, with a good stove, could be kept reasonably warm in winter. Their main problems were leaking during heavy rains and the constant sifting of dirt onto everything inside. Still, where timber was scarce or expensive, a sod die was often the most practical choice. Night has fully fallen now. Your cabin is dark except for firelight and maybe a single candle. You prepare a simple dinner, perhaps the last of us to that's been simmering all day, stretching a small amount of meat with more plentiful beans, turnips, or potatoes. Food preservation was a critical winter skill. Without refrigeration, keeping food edible through months when nothing fresh could be grown required many strategies. Smoking meat was one of the most effective methods. A properly smoked ham, bacon, or beef could last for months. The process involved first curing the meat with salt to dry out moisture, then hanging it in a smokehouse where it absorbed preservatives from slowly burning hardwood. The result was not only preserved but often delicious. Salting was another common method, especially for meat and fish. The meat would be packed in salt or soaked in strong brine. The salt drew out moisture and created an environment where bacteria couldn't grow. Properly salted meat could last all winter, though it needed thorough soaking before cooking to be palatable. Root vegetables, potatoes, carrots, turnips, onions could be stored in root cellars, underground rooms or pits, where the earth's stable temperature kept them from freezing or rotting. A well-built root cellar stayed just above freezing, even when outside temperatures plunged far below zero. Fruits were often dried in the summer sun, then brought out in winter for pies, sauces, or just eating as they were. Berries, apples, peaches, anything that could be sliced thin and dried thoroughly could be saved this way. Beans, corn, and other grains were dried on the plant, then stored in rain-proof containers. These staples formed the backbone of winter nutrition, providing carbohydrates and some protein. For indigenous communities, pemmican was the ultimate survival food. Made from dried meat, usually buffalo pounded to powder, mixed with melted fat, and sometimes dried berries. It was incredibly nutrient-dense and stable. A small amount provided substantial calories and complete nutrition. It was so effective that European fur raiders and explorers adopted it. Similar foods are still used today by military forces and wilderness adventurers. After eating, you prepare for the night ahead. The fire is carefully banked not too low that it might die before dawn, not so high that it wastes precious fuel. You might heat stones or fill jugs with hot water to place in your bed, creating pockets of warmth that last for hours. The nighttime routine included attention to security. Doors were barred not just against unlikely human intruders, but against desperate predators seeking warmth or food. Windows were shuttered or covered with blankets to stop heat loss. Then came perhaps the most important winter survival tactic of all: rest. The human body burns calories to maintain its temperature. In extreme cold, this energy use increases dramatically. Adequate rest was essential to conserve energy and stay healthy through the long winter months. Sleep patterns on the frontier differed from ours today. Without abundant artificial light, people generally slept when it was dark and worked when it was light. That meant more sleep in winter, less in summer. Many described a pattern of first sleep and second sleep, sleeping for several hours after nightfall, waking for an hour or two of quiet activity around midnight, then returning to sleep until dawn. This Paphosic sleep pattern appears in records from many pre-industrial societies. It may be more natural for humans than our modern expectation of one unbroken night's sleep. In winter, it let people check in fires during the coldest part of the night without fully waking from deep sleep. As you settle into your bed, pulling heavy blankets to your shoulders, your mind might drift to spring. It seems impossibly distant, but experience has taught you it will come. Snow will melt, grass will return, birds will sing again. That certainty, that knowledge of the cycle's inevitability sustained people through even the harshest winters. Your optimism exactly, but a realistic understanding that nothing, not even winter, lasts forever. Your muscles relax one by one as your bed's warmth cocoons you against the freezing night. The contrast between the deadly cold just inches away and the nest of safety you've created makes the comfort all the sweeter. The sound of the wind, which picked up again after sunset, seems to emphasize your security rather than threaten it. Your breathing naturally falls into a slow, steady rhythm. The strain of the day's work fades from your limbs, replaced by a pleasant heaviness. Your mind drifts to the neighbors you visited, the web of human connection that makes survival possible in this harsh landscape. You feel a sense of belonging, of being part of something resilient and enduring. Outside, the winter night deepens. Stars appear in impossible numbers, brilliant against the black sky in a way city dwellers rarely see. The moonlight reflects off the snow, creating a strange, silver half-minus light bright enough to cast shadows. Your eyelids grow heavy. You picture that silent, beautiful world outside continuing its ancient cycles while you rest, gathering strength for tomorrow. The world begins its slow turn. The days, once so brutally short, start to stretch almost imperceptibly. The sunlight that filters through your cabin window grows stronger, less watery. These are whispers of change written in the sky for those who know how to read them. On the frontier, these transitional weeks between deep winter and true spring could be the most challenging of all. Food stores, carefree rationed, might be running dangerously low. Humans and animals alike grew weary of confinement. The weather became wildly unpredictable, bitter cold snaps followed by brief thaws that turned snow to treacherous mud before freezing solid again overnight. You wake one morning to an unfamiliar sound, a steady drip minus drip from the cabin's eaves. The temperature climbed above freezing overnight. Outside, the snow has a wet, glazed surface that reflects the sunlight with a painful brightness. The air feels different, still cold, but with a dampness that hints at deeper change. For those who survived the winter of 1887, these first signs of fall brought complicated feelings. Relief, of course. The deadly cold was loosening its grip, but also a deep anxiety. What would they find when the snow melted? How many cattle had survived? Were fences and barns still standing? What damage would be revealed when the frozen earth turned to the thick mud of spring? For the cattle barons who had dominated the West before this catastrophic winter, the fall would reveal the full scale of their losses. As the snow receded, carcasses appeared everywhere. Cattle frozen solid where they stood, piled against fence lines where they had huddled against the wind, washed downstream in grotesque logjams when the rivers began to flow again. The stench, by all accounts, was unimaginable. This single winter changed everything. The era of the open range was over. The cattle industry transformed from a gamble on vast, free-roaming herds to a business of smaller, fenced operations with winter feeding and planned shelter. Land use shifted. Economic power moved. The romantic, untamed West of legend began to fade, replaced by something more managed, more controlled, and in many ways, more sustainable. For your frontier family, spring brought its own rituals and challenges. As soon as the weather allowed, there was an explosion of activity. Repairs to winter-damaged structures, preparations for planting, assessment of livestock, reconnection with neighbors who had been unreachable for months. The cabin that had been a place of safety and confinement suddenly felt too small, too dark, too full of the accumulated smells and tensions of a long winter. Spring cleaning was just a tradition. It was a psychological necessity. Throwing open the door and the tiny windows on the first truly warm day, airing out the bedding, scrubbing the floors, perhaps even taking the radical step of a thorough bath, a luxury after months of water shortages and extreme cold. Spring also meant the return of community. Neighbors gathered for celebrations, for barn raisins, for shared labor. After months of isolation, these gatherings had a special sweetness. They reinforced the bonds that had kept everyone alive. People shared not just resources, but stories, tales of close calls, of losses, of small victories against the cold. This shared narrative wove individuals into a community with a common history of endurance. For the indigenous peoples of the plains, spring meant a return to movement. Many tribes followed seasonal migrations, tracking game and plant foods as the land awakened. Traditional ceremonies marked the transition, giving thanks for survival through winter, asking for blessings on the coming seasons of growth. Their deep knowledge of the land's cycles, honed over millennia, was a form of resilience that many settlers only began to appreciate much later, often after learning hard lessons themselves. The resilience shown by frontier communities remains inspiring. Without modern technology, emergency services, or instant communication, they survived conditions that would test our most advanced systems today. They did it through preparation, adaptation, community, and extraordinary mental fortitude. Many of our modern winter survival strategies have roots in this era. Layered clothing, pioneers perfected it. Home insulation techniques, learned through trial and error and sometimes fatal error. The psychological approach to long, dark months, maintaining routines, creating meaningful indoor work, finding small pleasures. These were frontier necessities that became cultural wisdom. Perhaps their most important lesson was a balanced relationship with winter. They didn't see it as a romantic wonderland, nor as a purely evil force to be conquered. They respected its dangers without despair. They prepared for its challenges without panic. They found stark beauty in its austerity, but never forgot its deadly potential. This clear-minded perspective allowed not just survival, but a kind of hard-won harmony with the natural world. As the light begins to fade on this transitional day, you return to your cabin. Inside, the familiar space feels different. The air is less dry. The perpetual chill is less sharp. You still build your evening fire, but with a little less urgency. The immediate threat of freezing has passed. Dinner might include something special tonight. The last of the preserved summer berries mixed into cornbread. A bit of honey saved for a celebration. On the frontier, seasons shaped life more directly than any calendar. These small luxuries marked important transitions. You prepare for sleep. The routine is similar to winter nights, but with subtle changes. Fewer blankets on the bed, less spanking of the fire. The gradual easing of survival pressure brings its own quiet peace, a relaxing of the constant vigilance that winter demanded. You settle into your bed, feeling the familiar comfort of the strong mattress that has cradled you through months of cold nights. Outside, the sounds have changed. The wind's howl has been replaced by the gentle drip of melting snow. An occasional night bird calls, another sign of the turning world. In this quiet moment between wakefulness and sleep, you reflect on the winter now ending. You think of the skills honed reading the weather in the clouds, building a fire that lasts, layering clothes for maximum warmth, preserving food to last for months. These weren't hobbies. They were the difference between life and death. You think of the community that formed in isolation, the neighbor who shared flour when yours ran low, the family you checked on after the worst storm, the unspoken agreement that no one would be left to face the cold alone. This web of mutual obligation was the true social contract of the frontier. You think of the mental journey, the days when cabin fever made the walls feel like they were closing in, the nights when the wind scream tested your sanity, the strategies you developed to keep your mind steady, telling yourself stories, planting the spring garden in meticulous detail, finding a strange peace in the simplicity of necessary tasks. This cycle of seasons, each with its dangers and gifts, its intense work and structured frontier life in a way most of us have forgotten. We've built artificial environments that stay largely the same, regardless of the world outside. This brings comfort and convenience, but it has also disconnected us from the natural rhythms that shaped human experience for most of history. The lessons of that brutal winter are not just historical curiosities. They are a manual for resilience, preparation. The settlers who survived were the ones who gathered resources in times of plenty. They didn't wait for the storm to hit before chopping wood. They thought ahead because the cost of not thinking ahead was unthinkable. Adaptation. They changed their methods to fit the land, not the other way around. They learned from their mistakes, and from the people who knew the land best, often the indigenous tribes who had thrived there for centuries. Community. They understood that individual survival was tied to collective well-being. They shared knowledge, resources, and labor. They checked on the vulnerable. They knew that a community's strength was measured by how it cared for its weakest members. Mental fortitude. They developed routines to support their minds. They found purpose in hardship. They maintained hope without denying reality. They balanced acceptance of their circumstances with relentless, creative problem-solving. As you lie in your bed, these reflections drift through your mind like the lazy smoke from your banked fire. But gradually, the day's work and the room's gentle warmth pull you towards sleep. Your breathing slows and deepens. Your body remembers the labor of winter, the chopping of wood, the breaking of trails through deep snow, the constant small movements to stay warm. Now in the safety of your bed, each muscle can finally release. Starting with your feet, a pleasant heaviness spreads upward. Your toes, curled against cold floors for months, can relax. Your ankles, which stabilized you on ice, loosen. Your calves and knees, which carried you through drifts, surrender to rest. Your hips and lower back settle deeper into the mattress. Each vertebra seems to sigh with relief. Your abdomen relaxes. Your breath comes easily now without the tension of cold or fear. Deep, slow, steady. Your shoulders, which carried so many burdens, finally release. They broaden and soften. Your arms grow heavy at your sides. Your hands, so often clenched against the cold, open gently. The back of your neck lengthens. Your jaw, tight from cold and concentration, loosens. Your lips part slightly. The tiny muscles around your eyes let go of their constant watchfulness. Even your scalp relaxes, sending a mild, pleasant tingle across your head. Your thoughts, like your breath, begin to slow and drift. They become less distinct, more dreamlike. The sounds around you, the occasional crackle from the stove, the steady drip of melting snow outside, the soft settling of the cabin itself blend into a gentle background. It cradles you rather than keeping you awake. This is how people have fallen asleep for thousands of years. Gradually, naturally, in rhythm with the world around them. Without electric lights to disrupt their rhythms, without digital screens to keep their minds racing. Sleep came as an extension of the day's end. A natural transition, not an abrupt switch. On the frontier, sleep patterns changed with the seasons. Longer in winter's darkness, shorter in summer's extended light. Following the earth's rhythms, not fighting them. This may have been a kind of health we've since forgotten. Your breath continues its slow, steady rhythm. In undoubt, each exhalation carries you deeper into relaxation. Each inhalation brings a quiet peace. Your consciousness begins to soften at the edges. Rational thought gives way to the gentle kaleidoscope of pre-dream images. You might see fragments of the day, the glitter of sun on wet snow, the patient look in your horse's eye, the rough grain of the wood you chopped, or deeper memories surface faces of loved ones far away, land sketched from a childhood before this frontier life, moments of connection and beauty that the mind saves and returns to in this liminal space between waking and sleeping. The frontier night deepens around your cabin. Stars will slowly overhead, their cold light casting faint, moving patterns through the window, or perhaps clouds gather again, promising more changeable spring weather. Either way, the darkness outside makes the small circle of safety inside your bed, your shelter, the life you've preserved through winter's worst, feel all the more precious. Your eyelids grow heavy, too heavy to keep open, but there's no need for vigilance now. No reason to fight the sweet, natural pull of sleep. Each breath becomes slightly deeper, slightly slower. Your heartbeat is gentle and regular. The weight of your body against the bed feels perfect, as if you're being held exactly as you need to be. The day's concerns, what needs repairing, when to plant, how to rebuild, fade into the background. They are problems for tomorrow's rested self. Now was only this moment of perfect transition. The mind letting go of its constant doing. The body surrendering to rest. Sleep approaches like a gentle wave. Each breath carries you closer to its shore. The frontier winter, with all its brutal challenges in life minus defining lessons, has shaped you but not broken you. You survived its worst through ingenuity, through community, through a resilience that is our shared human inheritance. These qualities still live in us, though our challenges take different shapes. Your breathing slows one final, noticeable notch. Your consciousness shifts from fragmentary thoughts to the formless peace that comes before dreams. The last tiny thread of tension dissolves, leaving only the natural weight of complete relaxation. And sleep, the great restorer. The daily practice of surrender and renewal that every human shares, across all times and places, finally claims you completely. It carries you away from the frontier cabin, away from the memory of cold, into the universal landscape of dreams. Here, past and present, hardship and comfort, struggle and peace, all dissolve into the deeper, older currents of what it means to be alive, to endure, and to hope for the morning. Outside, the drip of melting snow continues its slow, steady rhythm, a promise that winter, no matter how harsh, never has the final word. Spring always comes. The thaw always follows the freeze. And life, stubborn, resilient, and beautifully fragile, always finds a way to begin again. The thaw, once begun, became its own force. What started as isolated drips from the eaves soon became a chorus of running water. Snowbanks slumped, their crisp edges softening into gentle curves. The world shifted from the silent, static white of deep winter to a landscape in motion, full of sound and subtle change. For you on the frontier, this was not a gentle transition. It was messy, arduous, and often disheartening. The pristine snow revealed what it had hidden for months. Not just the land, but the winter's toll. You stepped outside one morning to find the yard transformed into a shallow, icy lake. The snow, saturated with meltwater, had become a thick, heavy slush that pulled at your boots with each step. The path to the barn was a channel of muddied half-minus frozen runoff. This was breakup, and it trapped people as effectively as any blizzard. Travel, which had been impossible due to snow, now became impossible due to meet a thick, glue minus like gumbo that could mire a wagon to its axles. Your first task was assessing the damage. You waded through the slush to the barn. The structure had held, but just barely. Heavy snow had strained the roof, and a drift had pushed against the door, warping the frame. Inside, it was damp and smelled of wet hay and confined animals. The livestock, restless after months indoors, were within. Their winter coats, once thick, looked patchy and dragged as they began to shed. Their eyes held a weary patience. They too were waiting for the grass. This was the quiet reckoning, the careful tally of what and who had made it through. You checked your supplies. The flour barrel was scraped nearly clean. The salt pork was gone, save for a few hardened rinds. The root cellar, once proudly stocked, held only a few sprouting potatoes and withered carrots. You had survived, but your reserves were exhausted. The coming weeks, before the land could provide again, would be a tightrope walk between winter's end and spring's true bounty. This period was called the hungry gap by settlers and starving moon in some native traditions. It was the cruelest strike of the seasonal cycle. The body's need for energy was high with the return of work, but nature's pantry was at its absolute lowest. The old was gone, the new had not yet arrived. You adapted. Meals became even more inventive. You gathered the first pale shoots of dandelion greens from the edges of the retreating snow. They were bitter, but they were fresh, and your body craved their greenness. You might tap a maple tree if you were in the right territory, collecting sap to boil down into a precious few ounces of syrup, or sugar ray fleeting sweetness and vital calories. If you were near a stream, you checked for fish, though the water was icy and high with runoff, making fishing difficult and dangerous. The work changed too. The indoor crafts of winter, the whittling, the mending, the knitting, were set aside. Now, it was all about repair and preparation. You and every able-bodied person spent daylight hours fixing what winter had broken. Split rails for fences needed replacing. Tools, idle for months, required sharpening and oiling. The plow, if you had one, was dragged from its shed, its metal parts examined for rust or cracks. This was also the time for the communal work that defined frontier life. With the trails finally passable, neighbors emerged from their isolation. The first visits were quiet, solemn almost. People looked each other over, noting the new lines on faces, the lingering cough from a winter cold, the absence of those who hadn't made it. But soon the practical spirit took over. A barn raising was planned for a family whose roof had collapsed under the snow's weight. A logging bee was organized to help an elderly man cut and haul the firewood he'd need for the next winter, while the ground was still firm enough to drag logs. At one such gathering, you sat on a newly split rail, sharing a lunch of cold cornbread and fried salt pork. The conversation, as always, turned to the winter past and the one to come. Lost to heifers, a man named Jacob said, his accent still thick from the old country. Found him up against the north fence. Just leaned into the wind and never got up. He shook his head. Next year, bigger shed, with a south door. Another neighbor, a woman named Mary, who ran her homestead alone since her husband died of pneumonia 2 winters prior, spoke up. Implanting squash this year. Lots of it. Stores better than anything. And in digging my root cellar deeper. Should have done it last summer. This was how knowledge was solidified. Not just through survival, but through the analysis of that survival. Every loss was dissected not for blame, but for a lesson. Every narrow escape was studied for the tactic that worked. The collective wisdom of the community was being updated, written not on paper, but in changed plans and new resolutions. The mud eventually began to dry, helped by the strengthening sun and persistent wind. What was left was a landscape laid bare and bruised. The beautiful, endless white was gone, replaced by a monotony of brown and gray. The grass was matted and dead. The earth was scarred by erosion where meltwater had carved new channels. It was a bleak vista, but to a farmer's or rancher's eye, it held promise. You could see the land again, assess its contours plan. One afternoon, you walked your property's boundary. The act felt profoundly different from a winter trek. You weren't fighting for survival with each step you were surveying. You noted where snowdrifts had been deepest, where the wind had scoured the earth down to bare rock. This information was a map for the future. The deep -drift areas would be where snow collected again. Perhaps that was a good place for a future windbreak of planted trees. The scoured areas might be good for a building site naturally cleared. You also found what the snow had hidden. The skeleton of a deer, picked clean by scavengers. A leather harness you'd lost in an autumn storm now cracked and druid. And, most sobering, a single, frozen calf, hidden in a drawer. It must have gotten separated from its mother in an early storm. You buried it quietly, adding its fate to your mental ledger of winter's cost. As the ground truly began to warm, life returned with startling speed. One day, the world seemed dead. The next, the air buzzed with the first hardy insects. Birdsong, absent for so long, became a constant dawn chorus. Tight buds appeared on the cottonwoods by the creek. The change was not just around you, it was within you. The guarded, inward, focused mindset of winter began to soften. Your thoughts, which had been occupied with the immediate problems of warmth and food, now stretched forward to planting, to growth, to the future. The season of hope, so long deferred, had finally arrived. But it was a hope tempered by experience. This was not the naive optimism of the previous spring. This was a harder, more determined hope. You knew exactly what you were hoping against: the memory of that cold, the silence of the blizzard, the gnawing hunger of the hungry gap. That knowledge made the green shoots pushing through the mud not just a promise but a defiance. You began the first real outdoor work of the new cycle, preparing the garden plot. The earth was still cold and heavy. Turning it with a spade was back minus breaking labor. But the smell of the soil, that rich, dark, alive smell, was intoxicating after months of smelling only wood smoke, straw, and your own confined quarters. You worked until your muscles burned, and the sweat on your back felt like a forgotten luxury. This was the frontier's great rhythm: contraction and expansion. Winter forced life into the smallest possible space, the single room, the bundled body, the focused mind. Spring was the explosive reversal. Life burst its boundaries. It flowed out of the cabin into the fields, across the community. The silence was broken by work shouts and bird calls. The monochrome was shattered by the brown of earth, the blue of sky, the defiant green of new growth. As you washed your hands in a basin of sun-warmed water at the end of the day, you looked at your reflection in its surface. The face that looked back was thinner, older. The eyes held a stillness that hadn't been there before. You had been tested. You had lost things: supplies, livestock, perhaps the last of your romantic notions about the West. But you had held on. You had kept the fire lit. And now, you were ready to begin again. Not as the person who had arrived here, full of learned ideas and untested courage, but as someone who had been shaped by the land itself. You knew its kindness: the sun on your face, the fertility of the soil by the creek, and you knew its ruthlessness: the wind that could steal your breath and your heat, the snow that could bury your world. This hard -1 knowledge was your true possession. More valuable than any pelt or bushel of grain. It was the thing that would see you through not just one winter, but all the winters to come. You were no longer just living on the frontier. You were becoming of it. That as the last light of day faded, painting the scattered clouds in hues of rose and gold, you felt not just relief, but a strange, solid gratitude. The winter had been a monster, but in surviving it, you had discovered a strength you never knew you had. You had met the worst the world could throw at you, and you had found, deep within yourself and your community, the resources to endure. Tomorrow you would finish turning the garden. Next week you would help raise Jacob's newborn. In a month, if the weather held, you would plant. The cycle was turning. Life was moving forward, scarred but unbroken, carrying the memory of the cold within it, like a seed holds the memory of the tree.